Hi everyone. So in this first session, we are going to be taking a look at what a Domo app is, a sample of what the code for a Domo app would look like, a few examples of Domo apps that have been made in the past to support different workflows, all in the hope of giving you an idea of if a Domo app will be a good solution to your business problem or something that would supplement your decision making in Domo. So let's get started. I'm going to start here on developer.domo.com, which is going to be your jumping off point for understanding how to build apps. So let's start with the app showcase. Take a look really quick at some of the apps that have been built in the past. This is the Utah Jazz app. It's an app that was used by the Utah Jazz, a basketball team, to determine the ROI they were getting on the different seats throughout their stadium. Very custom map, very custom filters, custom display. All of this is done custom through custom code. And I'm saying customing a lot. That's because that's really the reason why you'd want to build one of these in the first place. Zillow, ESPN, you can tell us when I worked on myself. All of these are good case studies to look through and examine on your own time if you are considering a custom app or just want to get a better idea of what they are and what they can do. So let's start by building one. So my name is Justin Pumford. I do freelance consulting in Domo apps, specifically around whether or not you'd even need one first off, and all the way to implementation. I've been in software about 8 years now, and 3 of those, 3.5, 4-ish, were at Domo, working both on the team that built pages and also the team that built a lot of these custom apps that I've just showed you. So as we get started here, I'm going to assume you have Node.js and NPM already installed. If not, there's plenty of great tutorials online that can help you do that. And we will go through the process of installing the Domo CLI. So to install the Domo CLI, you'll open up command prompt and you'll run npm install -g Ryu. So what this is doing is installing the Domo CLI, which has been codenamed Ryu, never got changed. May be difficult to remember sometimes, but just reference back to this command. And we're going to wait for that to finish installing here. There we go. To check to make sure that we had it installed correctly, we can run this command domo-v, and it should give us a version number. So this is the Domo App CLI. There are multiple CLIs that you'll use when you're interacting with Domo. There's the Java CLI, and this is another CLI that we call the App Platform CLI or the App Dev Kit CLI. This is how you interact with your instance and the apps that are installed on it. So once we've confirmed that the Domo tool is installed correctly, we can then run our next command, domo login, choose the instance that we'd like to log into, or type in new instance, and we should be logged in. It will most likely open up a browser in the background where you can then log in. Because I've already logged in through the Domo CLI before, my browser's not popping up. It's just using authentication tokens. It's negotiated already. But if you're logging in for the first time, you will usually see a browser pop up asking for your login credentials. So now that we've logged into our instance, we can create a new project through Domo init. We can give the design a name. In this case, I'll call it Hello World. And then we can choose a starter. That's basically some code that the CLI will give you to work with from the very beginning. So that way you're not having to start from nothing. Because this is a Hello World example, we'll choose Hello World. You can use your arrow keys to tab through these and then hit enter on the one you want. We're not going to connect to any data sets for now. We'll leave that for later. All right, so sorry, my color scheme makes this a little bit difficult to see, but you'll see that it is reported that it created a new directory named our design, and it gives us some next steps to build our app. So as you can see here, we have a hello world directory. I can cd into it, and we have several files: app.css, app.js, domo.js, index.html, and manifest.json. App.css, if you've done web development, you'll recognize that CSS there. App.css is where you'll put all your styling that helps the appearance of your app to change. Won't change anything about the text or the shapes and things like that in it, buttons, things like that, but it will change the way they look. App.js is where you put in your app's logic. Domo.js is just a helper library. If you open it up, you'll see a bunch of gibberish, so there's no need to go into that file. Don't remove it, leave it there. Index.html is the HTML page where you define all the text or the structure of your page. Manifest.json is a special file unique to Domo apps. It's a JSON file, so it'll have a bunch of stuff that looks like JavaScript that essentially just defines config about your app. It'll give the app name, it'll give any data sets that you've connected to, and as well as any collections you've defined in AppDB, which we'll talk about later. So now let's open that folder up in your favorite editor. I use VS Code. VS Code is an extremely common tool. It's free that you'll see a lot of web developers use. I think it's a great choice if you don't already have an editor that you've chosen. VS Code is a really solid choice. So as you can see in our files, we don't have very much right now. App.css has a little bit of styling rules, but nothing substantial. App.js is totally empty. Domo.js, as you can see, it's gibberish. We don't need that right now. Index.html, extremely simple. We're pulling in our style sheets here. We've got a heading, hello world. We're importing the domo.js script. Then we're importing this empty app.js script. In manifest.json, you'll see it's been pre-populated with a little bit of information. Hello-world is the name of the app. Version, we aren't too worried about this right now, so 1.0.0 is perfectly acceptable. A size, which defines how big the card will show up when you actually do make a card around the app in Domo. And then a mapping that will describe the different data sets that your app has access to. Right now, we're not going to pull any data from Domo. We're just going to keep this nice and simple, so we can keep that empty. So let's get this up in Domo. In order to do that, we're going to open up a terminal, just like we had before, but in our editor. Run Domo-V just to make sure that we have the Domo CLI installed correctly. Perfect, and we're going to run a command, Domo publish. In the directory, you'll note that we had a warning. A thumbnail is required before creating a card with this design. There's a really easy way to add a thumbnail in, and I will type out those commands for you so you can do this. So we're going to start by using Wget. And there's a really cool website I like called placehold.it that allows you to request arbitrary sized pictures, and it will generate them for you. It's really nice. So we're going to type this out. We're going to fetch placehold.it/300x300.png, which is this size thumbnail that's required in order to publish a Domo app. And we're going to name it thumbnail.png. So we're going to run that. Then we're going to run Domo publish again. So now that we've published the design, you'll notice that there's an ID in manifest.json. It added a new field called ID. This is what we call the design ID. Now, an app design is really kind of like a blueprint for an app. It isn't an app itself until you make a card from the app design. So to do that, we're going to move over to our Domo instance here, and we're going to go into the menu at the top under More. We're going to go to Asset Library, which you've probably always wondered what it does, and you're going to learn today what will show up in the Asset Library. Now I have a few designs that show up here because I've been working on some other things, but you'll note at the bottom that we have Hello World. Hello World is the thing that I just published, as you can see, updated a minute ago. From here, we can click New Card, give it a name, my Hello World app, and see a preview of it. As you can see, it's got nothing except the title of the app, which is exactly what we'd expect because that's what we put in our HTML. We can hit Save and Finish, and it will show up on our overview. Here it is down here. I can click the bottom and expand it into a full screen view as well. Now, it would be kind of annoying to have to, every time you edit your app, to have to republish it, recreate a new card for it, and just go through that process over and over and over again. So the Domo CLI actually has a command that you can use to run your app in development mode so that any edits you make will be reflected in your browser in real time. Let's go back to our editor. We're going to run a command called domo dev. Hit enter. Now it'll probably open up a browser. Mine opened one in my other monitor, but I'm going to open this up manually in the video feed for you. It will give you a URL down here with which you can access the app locally. So you can just copy that, go into your browser of choice, paste it in, and there's our app. Now this can actually respond to any edits you make. To show you, you can go to index.html, hello world, a second time. Change one of the titles, save the file, move back over, and there it is, refreshed. Let's hit Control-C to exit out of the development server, run Domo publish again. Go back to our browser, go back to Domo, refresh the full screen card, and there we've edited something that now shows up on Domo again. So there you have it. That's our first app. Congratulations if you made it this far. We're going to do something a little bit more complicated now that might be a little bit more useful. Sugarforce. So this is an app that was made by one of the teams at Domo to kind of demonstrate a few of the features that you get with apps. So far, we've just shown static data. We've just shown that title. That's not very interesting. Where it gets more interesting is when we can query data from Domo, number one, and number two, store data back in Domo based on inputs and things that we do within this app. Three, custom viz. We can query data from Domo, and it's interesting to show it in a table, but it's even more interesting if we go above and beyond what we could have already done in the card analyzer and put it in a chart that we may not have access to from within Domo. So just a quick overview of what this app can do. Here's a leads page. This is pulling from a data source, as you can see, data set that exists in Domo, and allows us to click on each of the these rows and kind of see our leads here. Opportunities lets us make some notes about different opportunities. We can hit the plus button down here. Choose a company name. This is also data that comes from Domo. Set an amount. This isn't a great opportunity, so it's $5. But you know, we'll take any opportunity. So drop some information and choose an attachment. We can submit that, and that gets written to the app's persistent storage. And just to prove that, I'll refresh this page where it'll reload the app. And if I was not lying to you, then we'll see our opportunity show up again. Reports, we can filter some data. This filters down to the Pacific territory, so these states, and you'll just have to trust me on this one, but there are 14 rows that take place in California and 3 that take place in Washington, and here they are displayed on this map. So let's build Sugarforce together. So when you run the Domo command line and run Domo init, one of the options that you get, as I can demonstrate here, is Sugarforce. You could start a new app with that. It is missing a little bit of code because I believe it is meant as an exercise, and there's a great video one of my old coworkers did that shows you how to build the Sugarforce app and walks you through that. We're just going to do a quick overview of Sugarforce with it already built for us. And in order to do that, we're going to want to go into Domo for Developers, where we were before, build an app on the Domo platform, and go to Start Building an App. This is all the document. This will be your best friend if you spend any amount of time building apps, because it's got all the information, all the API references, exactly how you use all the tools that you have available to you as an app developer. So we're going to go straight away into complete code examples, and you'll see this link. Check out the complete code examples of the Sugarforce app here. We'll open that up in a new tab. This is all on GitHub, nice and familiar if you spent any time developing. We are going to download a zip of this code. I already have it downloaded, so I'm just going to go into that directory. Again, you're welcome to use whichever editor you'd like to edit this code. I'm going to use VS Code. So here's the directory structure. It's a little bit different because it's a little bit more complicated. So we still have our manifest.json as expected and index.html, as well as a little fancier thumbnail than what we were using. Those 3 things you'll see in every app at the root level. You can't really put them anywhere else. But the others, you can put them wherever you want, as long as you refer to them correctly in your index.html. So we have components here. These we're not really going to go over because they're a little bit more complicated, and they're more what we call boilerplate. So things that you generally put in most projects that you work on. If you're using React, you won't have to worry about these at all. If you're not planning on using React and just writing things in vanilla HTML and JS, of course you're welcome to just use the code in here as an example to copy and paste it in whatever projects you end up working on. Here's some other JavaScript. App.js probably sounds pretty familiar. Domo.js, that also sounds familiar. Don't worry about editing that. That's just a bunch of minified code that is used to interact with Domo. Domo Phoenix with maps. That's the Domo app version of the Phoenix charting library, which is used to make charts in cards. That we will also not be using directly. Won't be going over exactly how that works, out of scope for this specific tutorial, but we have home, leads, opportunities, and reports, and this is the important stuff that we're going to go over. Styles, again, more CSS, not quite as interesting, and then the different views that get loaded within index.html, still not quite as interesting. What we're mostly focused on right now is home, leads, opportunities, and reports. So let's go over those. So the leads page. Just as a quick reminder, this is what it looks like. It fetches some data from Domo and displays it in a table. So we've got a few different interesting features. We've got name, we've got title, company name, city, and state. And those are all columns available within our data set. This is how we query them. We use a utility function called domo.get, and we pass in a special string, which is really a URL that is a REST endpoint that is used to load data from Domo. It's /data/v1, and then the alias that we've set for this specific data set. Now, what is an alias? That's a good question. How do we find that? Within manifest.json, you'll notice this manifest.json is a little bit more complicated than the one we had before. The one we had before, the mapping field, was an empty array. This one actually has an object in it. This is how we define exactly what data is queryable from within our app. We've given it a dataset ID. This can be overridden, but you'll generally want to give a good default dataset ID. So this ID here is actually pulled from the dataset that I want to use with my app. When I'm on the page for the dataset, if I go to the URL, you'll notice there's this big, ugly global identifier that shows up in the URL. That's the dataset ID. This is what you're going to want to use in that field. Mine's a little bit different, but that's okay because you can override it when you actually make the app. You'll give it an alias, which is a human-friendly name that makes your life easier. And then you also give it some fields. In this case, we haven't given it any fields, and that's okay. We just need to, this is for overriding and is a little bit more, more involved. You're welcome to read about it in the documentation, but for now, know that an empty array is perfectly acceptable to use. Moving back into leads, now you know where this alias comes from. Well, we have a few parameters we can pass it. Fields is the columns that we've chosen to select: ID, name, title, company name, city, and state. And these do need to be the column names that you've given that data set in Domo. We also have said that we want to limit our response to have at most 10 items back. And the reason for that is because due to performance limitations, we don't want to select too much data. Depending on the use case, you can select several thousand rows and still be okay. But anything more than a few thousand rows may cause your app to start running slower. And that's just due to the nature of the JavaScript, the web platform. It's running on someone's device. If it was on a phone or an older computer, the computer may not be able to handle the amount of data that's coming back. Now, some information on how you generate this yourself. Well, in Domo for Developers, if you go down to API reference and go to Data API, you'll find how you would generate this yourself, along with all the documentation on the options available. You'll note that right now we're only using fields and limit. Well, these are pretty well documented here. And if that's not helpful enough, you can also look at these different steps that are detailed on how to create an app from scratch, that pretty similar to what we're going through together right now. You'll see this matches what we see here pretty closely. So Domo.get will always return a JavaScript promise. And with JavaScript promises to process the data that's returned in a promise, we use .then, and you'll see at this point we're then passing it to another function, draw table. Now that function draws the table, as we've seen in the Domo UI itself. Let's go back to it. This table here is drawn after that function returns. The contents of draw table, you're welcome to look at them. They're a little bit more complicated and out of the scope of this tutorial. Next page, opportunities. This one's pretty similar, but it's got a little bit more going on because it allows us to write back to Domo. Now the way that's done is through a tool called AppDB. We've talked about querying data through Sugarforce. Writing data back to Domo is done through the AppDB API. Documentation for future reference is right here. AppDB is a simple data store. You can think of it like MongoDB, where no schema is necessarily required. You can write pretty much whatever JSON you want to MongoDB, and it will store it for you, and you can query it. Well, you can do about the same with Domo's AppDB. Let's look at what that code looks like. It's pretty much the same in terms of it being a RESTful interface. So you're going to run domo.get, domo.put, domo.delete. If you want to do different things to it, like domo.get would be to get information from AppDB. Domo.put would be to update existing information. Domo.post here would be to create new information. Domo.delete, obviously, to delete. So when this JavaScript runs, when the opportunities page is open, as you can see, we create a blank opportunity here and add that to the button. So that way, if you did want to make a new opportunity, that opportunity is ready for when you click the button. Then we run get opportunities. This runs a domo.get, but it's not getting data that is existing as a data set in Domo. It's actually getting data specific to that app out of AppDB. And this is the URL that we pass it. Domo data stores v1 collections. This will always be the same when you get data from AppDB. This, however, will be different. Opportunities. That's the name of a collection that we've chosen within AppDB. And that's detailed also in manifest.json under the collections key in the JSON object. The details of how that works and the specifics of how to get, post, put, and delete from AppDB are all detailed in the documentation and also in the accompanying video for Sugarforce. So let's get Sugarforce into Domo. To do that, we are going to start by creating a new data set. I like to just click on database to get to the connectors pretty quickly. And in connectors, we're going to search for sample data engine. We're going to run get the data. Once this finishes loading, we're going to scroll all the way down or close to it and select Sugarforce. Under report, we're going to choose leads. Say Sugarforce sample data, or whatever you'd like to call it. Hit save. And wait just a bit. Once that's been created, we'll go back to our editor, open up a terminal, and then from here, since we're already logged in, we can run Domo publish. But first, before that, sorry, remove these two keys in manifest.json because they don't apply to our app. We don't have it published yet, so we technically don't have an ID. We want our app to generate that. So let's run Domo publish. The new design has been created. And there, everything's been uploaded. So just like before, we're going to go into asset library, and we're going to find that there is a new Sugarforce available in our asset library, updated a few seconds ago. This is the right one. We can create a new card from it, give it a name, and then we're going to do something a little bit differently this time. We're going to go down here. We're going to click on leads, that alias that we set. We're going to select a data set for it. And unfortunately, it looks like our indexing is running slow right now. Hopefully we get that fixed. In any case, I've run through this 1,000,001 times. Once you save that, this is what it ends up looking like. So there you have it. Sugarforce running in Domo lets you query data, lets you write to data, and run reports. In the next video, we'll go over a custom visualization, and the one after that, which I think it will probably be the most useful out of the three, we'll actually build something in React that allows you to annotate some data from a data set and write that back to Domo as well for further processing if you need.